All right, I feel like I'm going to get basically undeserved backlash from some of you over this video. And just rest assured, there's nothing I say here that I don't think D'Amico Ryans himself is saying in defensive meeting rooms and to his players, and some of which he actually said publicly in press conference last year. First off, Texans defense was very, very impressive in a lot of ways last year, even more so than I remembered when I started stacking up where they ranked. Second most interceptions in the league, fourth most sacks, third most pass breakups, second in tackles for a loss. They were playing behind the line of scrimmage a lot. They had the lowest completion percentage allowed. They did some really, really, really good things. Okay, everybody? Okay? I'm telling you that. They did some really good things. Here's the thing. As a team, Texans were 14th in points allowed. Not good enough. And I know exactly, because I've been told this many, many times whenever I bring this up. People will say, well, the offense wasn't helping them out. They're in poor field position. True. Much of that is true. But also you have to account for the fact that they allowed a lot of big plays, a lot of deep shots. They had the third most touchdowns on passes of 20 yards or more. Opposing offenses targeted the Texans deep at the second highest rate in the league, 14.3% of pass attempts. They had the ninth most runs of 20-plus yards against them. And D'Amico had talked about this multiple times and talking about keys to a game beforehand, issues afterwards. They would play great defense 97% of the time, but then there were breakdowns in the secondary, there were breakdowns at linebacker at times, breakdowns in leverage. These technique errors and some of these mental errors are something they just absolutely essentially have to clean up this year if they really want to get it. The upside and the positive side is that a lot of these issues were simply youth. Kalen Bullock early in the season and in the first half of the season until he got going. I mean, Jimmy Ward, we'll remember in the first Indianapolis game, got caught with poor leverage a couple times. At times, guys got beat one-on-one, but more often than not, it was either a backup playing at cornerback or there was either a rookie safety or a backup safety that is going to be a different guy, hopefully, this year if they can stay healthy. There were times where when Jalen Petrie was tasked with being on Devontae Adams one-on-one, does an older, more experienced Kalen Bullock at least be in a better position to help him out there? That's a big key, and we all know that. Some of the safety flaws were the most egregious things. That's where C.J. Gardner-Johnson very much comes in. That's where the maturation of Kalen Bullock comes in. That's where hopefully the health of Jimmy Ward being used in spell duty instead of hoping. And then the poor guy in the Titans game that just sat and waited for the ball to come down to him like a punt. But this last play here versus Ladd McConkey really illustrates one of the issues with a lot of the big plays, and we saw this in the playoffs versus the Chiefs. Simply tackling. So I will say the big plays defensively with the secondary breakdowns, that was an issue. Second big issue was just tackling. They missed a lot of tackles, something that they had been doing before D'Amico Ryans got here, and I've been kind of surprised that they've been as bad at tackling as they have been. Last year, they had, the sixth most missed tackles in the league. And a lot of people will say, well, is that really fixable? Yes, 100%, 1,000%. I was a player who was in my fifth year in the NFL when I finally got a coach who actually taught me how to tackle properly. And I'm including Pop Warner, high school, college, first 4 years in the NFL. That was the first time I had a coach that genuinely understood how to teach tackling. There's teams in the NFL that do a really good job teaching tackling, and they perennially have the fewest missed tackles in the league. This is something I saw D'Amico's philosophy shift on as the season wore on. D'Amico used to be fond of, I think, thinking that the swarm mentality was going to take care of issues with tackling, that as long as you get enough shots on a guy, then, hey, he's going to go down, but you also create those turnovers as you're going in for your shot. You can do both. If you go back and watch a highlight reel of Ronnie Lott, people are fond of saying, oh, he could never play in today's NFL. Nope, not a guy like that because he just loved to headhunt. No, Ronnie Lott, the vast majority of his big hits were also form tackles or could have turned into a form tackle if he had to keep driving his legs. And there needs to be an emphasis on this. If you want to avoid a lot of these big plays, go to the Chiefs game in the playoffs, and you got to watch. You're watching a geriatric Travis Kelce break a tackle and get an extra 10 to 15 yards after the catch. So these are fixable things, and they're very much things that D'Amico's going to be talking about and drilling. So it's not like I'm terrified of it or anything. They have the potential to be a genuinely elite defense if they clean some of these things up with youth and health and just simple tackling. The other big thing, and this is the thing I'm a little bit more nervous about, is simply the tight ends, and specifically versus tight ends, because and I'll just use the fantasy stats because that's where it hits you guys the most in the gut. Versus tight ends, they allowed the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends last year. And we saw when they were going up against Sam Laporta or Mark Andrews or various other guys where that was an issue. Here's Mark Andrews down on the goal line. And this is going to be, I'm not trying to pick on anybody individually, but on this play, it's going to be Christian Harris. And I know it's Christian Harris for sure because if you watch his body language after the play, that's an upset Christian Harris right there. That was after he had missed the whole season. But if he can be healthy, him continuing to stack on what he did 2 years is going to be a big deal. Sam Laporta went off versus the Texans. Now with a lot of volume catches, but with some big catches. And in this one, we'll watch Henry To'oTo'o just down there to the left. Just, bites a little too hard, and it gets away from him. Sam Laporta, again, up the seam this time. We'll talk about safeties and safeties needing to be better around the board, hopefully staying healthier this year. That's versus tight ends, and now that Tyler Warren has entered the picture and he's playing on a team with a ridiculously inaccurate quarterback who needs an easy target like a tight end. I think Tyler Warren's going to be featured heavily. You're going to see that a couple times this year. So those are my 3 big things. The big plays allowed. The tackling would be number 2, which is wrapped up in everything else. And then the young tight ends, Henry To'oTo'o and Christian Harris. Azeez Al-Shire has struggled in pass coverage at times. Hemming that up, and then I think you're looking at a top 3 defense, but they just have to clean those things up. Love these live streams during work. Thank you. I love them too. It's great someone is covering this. I know our offense is the big question going into the next season, but our defense has plenty of room to improve. Yeah, and that's, I realized that as I was looking at the draft and I'm thinking about, okay, what are the biggest headaches and what are the things they need to address? You can't get complacent and think and act like, oh, wow, they did some really good things on defense last year, so they'll just roll on in and all the young guys will be better again next year. Henry To'oTo'o, Christian Harris, Caden Bullock is impressive as he was. He needs to continue to improve. Oh, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, obviously. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a big X factor in improving the overall play of the secondary. If aside from displacing Jimmy Ward, who's 34 years old now, Jimmy Ward has just had a hard time staying healthy the last couple of years. But I think using Jimmy Ward sporadically and appropriately and kind of load managing him, he's a big asset to the team. You just can't necessarily count on it. How can the secondary practice tackling if contact is generally restricted? Excellent question. Now, yes, it is, but it has been for a long time. And we'll go back to Ronnie Lott, because I've had this. I wrote essays on this a long time ago. Ronnie Lott worked at tackling, and he played on a team in the San Francisco 49ers that was amongst the first to never practice in pads. They just flat out didn't practice in pads. It was very avant-garde for the day. And people will say, well, yeah, but he was already great. Well, no, he worked at it on the heavy bag, and so much of tackling is, as they can tell you in rugby, it's stuff that doesn't have to be done full speed and at full contact all the time to drill it. It's about approach. It's about technique. It's about drilling, driving your feet through, and where to attack on the body. A lot of teams have brought in rugby tackler or like rugby coaches as tackling specialists, and they've adopted a rugby style of tackling. That's a whole nother tangent. That's at least one thing that's led to some of the hip drop stuff because of the different angles guys are taking. But it's very, like what the coach, Frank Gantz Sr., who's a special teams coach who started working with me as I was going into my 5th year in the NFL. It was everything that he taught me in the offseason. I worked with him after OTA practices, after workouts on my own an entire offseason, and he taught me a lot of the stuff that he was teaching the special teamers, but it was all done with dummies and drill work and everything else, and I went from being a guy who was kind of a sketchy tackler in the NFL to being, by defensive tackle standards, a very good tackler. Now, it's a lot harder for the guys that have to do it in space all the time, but it was all stuff that I did in the off season. So it's very much about technique, and and I don't say this as an insult to anybody out there who coaches perhaps, very, very few people, including the ones that, wish it was back in the old days when guys knew how to tackle, very few people actually educate themselves on how to properly teach effective tackling. Some NFL coaches do. You go back to those Legion of Boom defenses, and they were very, very sound tacklers. And they had brought in a tackling coach. They had a guy tasked with actually teaching tackling. So I'm hoping that D'Amico is more along those lines than how it was the last couple of years, because they could be so much better than they already are, and they did some things really, really well last year. So I'm gonna call this a short one because I'm gonna do a members only live stream a little bit later, and apologize to anybody I didn't get to all the questions. So please like, subscribe, tell a friend, rewatch, share on Facebook.